There's something about old libraries that messes with your sense of time. The fluorescent lighting flickers too slowly, like it's catching its breath between gasps. The silence isn't quiet. It hums, alive with the scratch of pens, the cough of dust, the weight of words. That's what I loved about Langley Hall's library. It felt like the books were watching you back. I'm Kieran, grad student, folklore major. Yeah, I know, not exactly a practical degree, but I'm not in it for job prospects. I chase stories, the weirder the better. Urban legends, ritual games, whispered myths, they call to me like static on an empty radio station. Langley Hall is the oldest building on campus, built in 1891. The university likes to brag that it was designed by a visionary architect, but no one seems to know his name. The place has an uneven number of floors, staircases that loop back on themselves, and corners that seem darker than physics allows. But the real heart of the place is the library. 3 stories tall. Publicly, anyway. Students whisper about a sealed-off basement. Some even claim there are sublevels marked with letters, not numbers. Most think it's just campus folklore. I used to think that too. I was deep into a thesis on liminal spaces in pre-industrial folklore and digging through the special collections room for source material. That's when I met her. She sat at the reference desk like she'd been carved from the desk itself. Same grain, same color. Her name tag said, Mrs. Miro. Her glasses were cracked down the center, yet she wore them like they still worked. Her hair was a silver nest piled high, and her eyes were sharp, too sharp. "Checking that one out, dear?" she asked, her voice smooth like old vinyl. I looked down at the book in my hand. The Untranslated Codices of East Holler, a local myth compendium I hadn't seen listed anywhere. "Yeah," I said, "for a thesis." She scanned it without touching any electronics. No beep, no keyboard, just a red stamp from an old-fashioned ink pad. Then she looked up at me and asked, "Did you finish the assigned reading?" It was such a random question. Maybe she meant a class assignment? I wasn't even sure which one. So I smiled and lied. Yeah, I did. That was it. Just a harmless, casual lie, one I barely thought about. She paused, the stamp hovering midair. Then, slowly, she pressed it down hard, harder than necessary. When she lifted it, the paper had a deep red sigil, something geometric and jagged that didn't look like any library stamp I'd seen before. She smiled, lips thin and dry. "Then you may use level E now." "Level? E?" I repeated, but she had already turned back to the book cart like the conversation was over. I stood there for a second, the book still warm in my hand. The phrase stuck in my head. Level E. I didn't remember seeing that label anywhere in the building. I'd been coming here for 3 years. Still, curiosity gnawed at me until I found myself wandering toward the elevator. Usually, the old elevator only had 3 buttons, 1, 2, and 3. But when I pressed the call button, the doors opened to reveal a 4th one. A small black button, glowing faintly. E. I stared at it, pressed it. The doors shut like a sigh. The hum of descent filled my ears, but the floor indicators didn't light up. After what felt like too long, the elevator jolted. Then I saw it. -13. The button was never there before, and it wasn't glowing. Just dull. Waiting. The elevator began to move again. Downward. The walls of the elevator groaned as it dropped past the normal floors. I counted each second in my head, expecting it to stop. But it didn't. There was no ding, no shifting of gears. Just that low, droning hum. My stomach floated for a second, like I'd hit a sudden drop on a roller coaster. Then it stopped. The doors didn't open at first. I pressed the glowing E button again. Nothing. Then slowly, with a sound like tearing paper, The doors parted. Beyond them was darkness. Not pitch black, but something denser, like the dark had weight, like it breathed. Pale green emergency lights buzzed weakly above, casting an ugly shimmer across cracked tile floors. A small sign hung crooked above the threshold. The lettering was faded, but I could just make out the marking. -13, I stepped out. The air was stale, tinged with something metallic and earthy, like an old crawl space, or the inside of a forgotten freezer. The hallway stretched to both sides, one direction ending in a reading room with glass-paned walls, the other swallowed by shadow. There were bookshelves lining the walls, but they were different, twisted, warped, like they'd melted and been reformed. The books themselves looked even stranger. Many had no titles on the spine. Some were wrapped in plastic or cloth. A few were stacked sideways, and others looked wet. One sat open on a pedestal, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. I should have gone back. But something inside me, curiosity, stupidity, some flicker of hunger I couldn't name, pulled me forward. Each step echoed too loudly, like the floor was listening. As I approached the reading room, a coldness seeped up through my shoes. The floor was smooth, but I swear it pulsed beneath me, like something was breathing under the tile. The glass walls were streaked with smudges, like fingers had dragged across them from the inside. I peered in. There were long tables, chairs with cracked leather, and hanging lamps that flickered with a sickly yellow hue. Books were scattered everywhere, open, piled, leaning as if someone had stormed out mid-research binge. But there was no one there, or so I thought. Then I heard it, a whisper, not from behind, not from ahead, from inside my ears. Why lie? I spun around. Nothing, just the hallway. The elevator doors had already closed. I rubbed my ears. Maybe it was a trick of nerves, or the air pressure, but the words had been real. They hadn't sounded angry, just disappointed. I took another step inside the reading room. The hanging lights swung slightly, as if someone had brushed past them a moment ago. On the center table was a stack of papers, handwritten in tiny script. I reached for them, but before my fingers touched the page, they blew off the table and scattered to the floor like birds taking flight. Okay, I muttered. Cool. Definitely haunted. The moment I said it, a low chuckle echoed, deep, guttural, and very close. I froze. My skin went cold. I turned slowly. At the far end of the room, behind one of the warped shelves, something moved. A shadow detached itself from the corner. It was tall, wearing a long coat or robe that trailed behind it like mist. But I couldn't see its face. Where its eyes should have been, nothing. Just smooth, pale skin. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, my pulse slamming in my neck. Then, it raised one hand, long, crooked fingers, and pointed at me. The books around me rustled. Pages flipped themselves open, and the whisper returned, louder now. You lied. Now you read. I backed away from the eyeless figure, one hand gripping the edge of the table. It didn't move, just stood there, arm raised like it was pointing to some invisible accusation stitched into the air. I waited for it to come toward me, but instead, it lowered its arm and turned. Then it walked, slowly, deliberately, into the deeper stacks. I don't know what possessed me to follow it. Maybe it was the same impulse that led me to press that glowing elevator button. That voice, the whisper, kept circling in my skull like static. You lied. Now you read. I stepped over the scattered papers on the floor. They were blank now. Pages that had been filled with writing only seconds before, completely clean, as if they'd erased themselves. I didn't have time to process it. The hallway beyond the reading room stretched farther than it should have. Much farther. The space bent unnaturally, shelving units arching upward into a ceiling that kept rising the deeper I walked. Some bookshelves had no books at all, just hollow frames filled with what looked like bones, or maybe twisted roots. I didn't want to look too closely. I finally saw the figure again. It was standing beside a tall lectern made of dark wood, fingers curled around the edge. There was a book resting on it, thick, bound in something rough and gray, like dried skin. I couldn't make out the title. There was no title. The figure didn't look at me. It just tilted its head toward the book. Then it stepped back and vanished behind a shelf. I should have turned around. I should have sprinted back to the elevator, but I didn't. I stepped up to the lectern and looked down at the book. It opened by itself. The pages flipped violently until they stopped on one covered in an oily script. The writing shimmered, like it was alive, but I couldn't understand a single symbol. It didn't even look human, just curls and jagged shapes, more like insect trails than a written language. Still, my eyes locked onto it. My brain felt like it was being rewired just by looking. A low ringing started in my ears. The air grew thicker. Then the symbols moved. They slithered across the page, shifting, folding into new patterns. I couldn't tear my gaze away. I felt dizzy, like I was looking into a language older than sound itself. A voice cut through the hum. "Don't read aloud." I jumped, heart racing. It was her, the librarian, Mrs. Miro. She stood behind me, somehow clean and untouched by the grime of this place. Her hair still in that neat silver twist, glasses glinting with cracked light. Her face unreadable. "How are you here?" I asked. "What is this floor?" She didn't answer, just stepped forward and placed one wrinkled hand on the book. "You were given a choice," she said. "You failed the test." "What test?" It was just a question. "And you lied." The lights flickered. The pages started turning again, faster this time, flapping like wings. Mrs. Miro didn't flinch. "Level E isn't for everyone. Only those who trespass through falsehood. You opened a door that isn't meant to close easily." I shook my head, trying to step away. "I didn't know. No one ever does," she said. "But now that you've read from the lexicon, it has read you back." A cold wind whipped through the shelves, scattering loose paper. I turned, but the books on the other shelves had started opening too. One by one, across the room, every book creaked open on its own. Mrs. Miro leaned in close, her voice a hiss in my ear. "Hope you're ready to learn." The wind didn't stop. It pushed at me from all sides, filled with whispering voices. Not words, at least not any I could understand. More like layers of sound curling over each other, whispering secrets to the inside of my skull. The books rattled in place. One slammed shut, another burst open, pages flapping so violently they tore themselves apart. Mrs. Miro didn't move. She stood calmly as the library around us shifted. Shelves slid across the floor like chess pieces. A crack opened in the tile near my feet, revealing more shelves beneath, an entire second tier buried underground. "What's happening?" I shouted over the wind. She looked at me with that same placid expression. "The lexicon is searching." "For what?" "For the truth inside you." I didn't understand, but I could feel it. Something was being pulled out of me. My memories flickered, scrambled. I thought of my mother's voice when I was 6, the sound of rain against the dorm window last October, the smell of ink and dusty paper, random pieces of my life, tearing loose. The book on the lectern pulsed. "Close it!" I shouted. Mrs. Miro shook her head. "It doesn't work like that." The shadows in the corners deepened. They didn't just stretch, they grew denser, pressing inward like something was pushing through from the other side. The eyeless figure was back, standing at the edge of the next aisle. There was another one now, too, taller, thinner, its fingers dragging along the shelf like they were looking for a title. "Why are they following me?" I whispered. "They are readers," she said softly. some never left. I felt nauseous. The world tipped. I grabbed the lectern to steady myself, but the texture of the book was all wrong, like touching dried coral or scabbed over skin. I pulled my hand back. The page had changed again. This time, the script had formed a diagram, circles within circles, lines connecting stars, symbols I didn't recognize. But in the middle, clear as glass, was my name, Kieran Dev, written in my handwriting. "No," I breathed. "I didn't write that." Mrs. Miro just looked at me, not accusingly, almost sadly. "You lied, Kieran, not just to me, to yourself." I didn't mean anything by it. It was just, intent doesn't matter here. Words are keys. Lies unlock rooms you weren't meant to enter. The diagram began to glow faintly. I took a step back, and the wind stopped. Just like that. Everything fell silent. Too silent. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Scraping. More than one pair. From the lower level. Mrs. Miro turned away from me and walked toward the edge of the cracked floor, where stairs had unfurled down into the shelves below. "You can still leave," she said, "but only if you give it something true." I didn't follow. I stood there shaking, the air too thick to breathe. The diagram in the book began to smoke. A new voice filled the room. Not like the whispering ones. This one was clear, ancient, and massive, like a voice coming from inside a canyon. "Speak, and be rewritten." I clutched my chest, heart hammering. I didn't know what it wanted. I didn't know what counted as true. Mrs. Miro was already gone, swallowed by the lower level. Behind me, the readers moved closer. I had a choice: stay or speak. So I opened my mouth, and I told the library the one thing I'd never told anyone. Not a fact, a memory, a truth I had buried so deep it hurt to say aloud. My brother didn't drown by accident. The air recoiled. It was the only way I could describe it. Like the entire floor took a step back from me the second the words left my mouth. My brother didn't drown by accident. The truth settled into the air like ink in water, staining everything. The lexicon snapped shut with a dry, leathery clap. The echo bounced through the chamber like gunfire, and the wind returned, but this time it circled me instead of pushing. It felt almost curious. The shadows drew closer, pulling away from the walls and shelves. The eyeless figures didn't advance. They stood still now, backs slightly bent like they were listening. The voice, the canyon-deep one, didn't speak again, but I felt it, like it was nodding, approving. My legs almost gave out. That confession had torn something open inside me. I hadn't said it out loud since it happened. The memory rushed up in pieces. The lake, the silence, the way I stood frozen on the shore while Arav slipped beneath the surface. He couldn't swim. I just watched. I was 11. I didn't scream until he was gone. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not to the library. To him. The floor rumbled. A soft thud came from the bottom level. Something was rising up, mechanical, grinding, like gears long rusted. From the fissure in the tiles, a platform ascended. On it sat another book. This one was smaller, red, bound in what looked like silk or something close to it. The platform stopped, and the voice returned, no louder than breath this time. "Take what you've earned." I hesitated. Mrs. Miro's voice returned from behind me. "Truth has value here. Most bring only lies. That's why they stay." I turned. She stood at the base of a spiral stairway that hadn't been there before, her silhouette etched in the amber light of old bulbs. "What is that book?" I asked. "Your record," she said. "Written by the lexicon. A ledger of who you are. You may take it, or you may leave it behind." I looked back at the red book. It didn't glow. It didn't pulse. But I could feel it watching me. "If I take it, what happens?" Mrs. Miro tilted her head. Then you will remember, but so will it. Behind me, the readers stirred again. If I leave it? I asked. You forget. You wake. This floor will vanish. You'll go on, never knowing what was written or what you gave. My heart pounded. The choice hung there like a thread between two cliffs. I reached for the red book. The second my fingers touched it, the floor dissolved beneath me. Not physically, but the sense of where I was collapsed. Space unraveled. Shelves fell upward. The lights exploded inward, and I was falling without moving. Pages spiraled around me, covered in screaming script. The book opened in my hands. My name inked on every page. But the pages weren't just memories. They were versions. Kieran the liar, Kieran the observer, Kieran the drowner. I saw myself 100 different ways. Some I recognized, some I didn't. In one, I ran. In another, I drowned with Arav. In another, I pushed him. My hands trembled. I didn't mean to, I whispered. A single page pulled loose and floated down, landing at my feet. It read, Kieran Dev, authorized to proceed. Then came the door. Right in front of me. Tall, brass, carved with symbols that squirmed if I looked too long. It opened inward, and beyond it, stairs, spiraling downward into a glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Mrs. Miro's voice echoed one last time. Not all truths are endings. Some are invitations. The stairs felt endless. I moved down step after step, red book tucked under my arm, hand grazing the cool brass of the railing. The spiral was too perfect. Not tight like most stairwells, but wide and open, like I was descending the inside of a tower that didn't belong in any earthly geometry. There were no walls, just a dim amber glow that lit the air as if it were mist, no ceiling above, and no floor I could see below. The deeper I went, the more the world hushed, like reality itself didn't want to interrupt. My name echoed behind me sometimes, whispered in voices that didn't belong to anyone I knew. Kieran Dev. I didn't answer. The stairwell eventually ended at a landing. In front of me was another door, iron this time, old and cold. Carved into it were two things, a mirrored version of my face, hollow-eyed, and a number, -13, not floor E floor, -13. I hesitated, but I'd already passed too many thresholds to stop. The door opened without my touch. Beyond it lay a circular chamber with no visible ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves, like before, but these were twisted, grown into one another like vines. Some of the books bled ink onto the floor. Others shivered or breathed faintly. At the center was a pedestal. No book this time, just a mirror. When I stepped forward, I didn't see myself. I saw a boy, 11 years old, standing at the edge of a lake. Arav, not in memory. He looked straight at me, like through the glass, like across time. And beside him, another Kieran, also 11, watching, frozen. No, I muttered. I already lived this. The red book pulsed under my arm. I opened it. A page flipped itself, revealing a line. Watch what was. Choose what is. The mirror shifted. Now Arav was underwater, and I was gone. Another version. Then another. I was in the lake, pulling him out. Then another. I wasn't there at all. Each variation flickered by, like a film reel. You lied to yourself, a voice said. I turned. It wasn't Mrs. Miro. It was me. An older version of me. His eyes were glassy. He looked drained. You built a new memory to survive, he said. You said he slipped. You said it wasn't your fault. I was a kid, I snapped. You were scared, he agreed. But you still chose. You watched, and later, you rewrote. The mirror cracked slightly. The red book glowed. I flipped another page. A new line appeared. Restore the true version, or leave it fractured. I stared at the mirror. Each version of the past, flickering in and out. Some kinder, some crueler. Which one was mine? The real one? I didn't know anymore. You're not here to find facts, the other Kieran said. You're here to choose the truth you'll carry. What if I don't want any of them? Then you become none of them. The shadows thickened. The readers were back, lining the walls now, silent, watching. I touched the mirror. It went black. One last version formed, me pulling Arav out, crying, screaming, but surviving, and later, telling the truth. I'll keep this one, I said. The chamber pulsed. The red book sealed itself shut, and the mirror shattered completely, fading into dust. Behind me, a final staircase formed, leading up, to the exit, to the last page. I climbed. Not because I was ready, but because the library had no more to show me, only what it wanted to keep, and what it would now let me take. The staircase ended at a door made of dark wood, warped like it had been stretched by time itself. There was no handle, only a keyhole. The red book grew warm in my hands. A page slipped loose, curling in midair, folding itself into a thin brass key. I took it. The lock turned on its own. The door creaked open. I stepped through and found myself back in the university library. The same marble floors, same dusty scent of ink and paper. But everything was dimmer. Office, no students. No hum of life. Just the faint ticking of a clock I didn't remember ever hearing before. And Mrs. Miro. She stood behind the front desk like she never left. Her milky eyes tracked me without moving. "You've returned," she said softly. I placed the red book on the desk between us. "I made it through." "You chose a truth," she said, gently tapping the cover. "Few do." I looked around. The library seemed older, like it had aged while I was gone. Or maybe I had. "Did I really go anywhere?" I asked. Mrs. Miro smiled. "You went where your answer was hiding." My voice cracked. What was the point of all this? She placed a hand over the book. To understand the cost of knowledge and the cost of avoidance. I thought about Arav, about all the years I'd buried it, lied to myself, lied to everyone else. "I never visited his grave," I whispered. I couldn't face it. "You can now." I nodded, a dull ache blooming behind my eyes. "What happens to this?" I asked, gesturing to the book. "It stays," she said, "filed away. Every truth we accept becomes part of the archive." Behind her, a slot in the wall opened. A shelf extended from the darkness. She placed the red book on it, and the shelf receded like an elevator into shadow. "What would have happened if I never confessed?" I asked. Mrs. Miro looked me dead in the eye. "You'd still be wandering floor -13, with the others." The air shifted. For the first time, I noticed the shadows deeper in the stacks. Silent shapes, pacing, trapped. My stomach turned. Those were people? Versions of people, she said. Those who lied and never stopped. I swallowed hard. Why was it me? Why did the floor appear when I lied? Because some lies echo loud enough to be heard by the foundation of things. She turned back to her desk, motioning toward the exit. I hesitated. "Will I remember this?" "That's up to you," she said. "You can bury it again, but it'll still be here, waiting." I stepped away from the desk. My legs were heavy, like gravity itself didn't want me to leave. As I reached the main doors, I turned one last time. "Mrs. Miro?" She looked up. "Who are you?" Her smile deepened. "I'm the librarian." The doors opened, flooding the space with warm daylight. I stepped through. And the second I crossed the threshold, the library behind me blinked out like a dream. Weeks passed. I returned to classes, submitted my thesis. But something fundamental had shifted in me. I visited Arav's grave, sat with the truth. I didn't lie anymore, not to myself. not to others. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the elevator. Ding. Sometimes I see a door that doesn't belong, or a book on a shelf that bleeds ink. And sometimes, when I walk past the old library building, it's not there, but the shadow of it is, waiting, not for just anyone, only for those who lie loud enough to be heard below. By floor -13.